He was the kind of man who seemed to have been born with the world in his favor. The only child of one of the city's most traditional families, raised in mansions with symmetrical gardens, educated at the best universities, and heir to a fortune built over 3 generations. Bernardo had everything, except peace. Beneath the image of perfection forged through discipline and protocol, there was a void that luxury could never fill. That's why, when he met Luna, a young woman with a spontaneous laugh, dressed in simplicity and a soul wounded by life, he felt, for the first time, that his heart knew exactly what it wanted. She worked at a small flower shop on the busy corner where he parked his car every day. But she didn't just sell flowers. She sold fragments of poetry wrapped in recycled ribbons. And it was there, between chrysanthemums and lilies, that the improbable happened. Luna didn't have an important last name, influential parents, or pretty stories to tell at gala dinners. What she had was a past surrounded by silence and scars. Raised by a sick grandmother, abandoned by her mother as a child, and having never known her father, she learned early on that the world wouldn't wait for her. She had worked as a waitress, a caregiver, a street vendor. She had survived evictions, cowardly lovers, and nights of cold without a blanket. And still, she smiled. Not out of naivety, but because she had decided that pain would not define her. When Bernardo started showing up more often, complimenting the flowers, asking for arrangement tips, and inventing excuses to talk, she was suspicious. She thought he was just playing with time, but time proved he was serious. He looked for her with his eyes, with his gestures, with that slightly awkward way of someone who never had to earn anything through effort. And she, though hesitant, gave in. The first kiss happened on a rainy night, between cardboard boxes and lavender scents. The passion was fast, intense, but filled with invisible obstacles. It wasn't just about different worlds. It was about worlds that repelled each other. Bernardo took her to discreet places, avoided photos, and steered clear of public outings. She pretended not to notice, but the absence of her name in his social circles was a discomfort that slowly grew. Still, Luna believed in love. Not the idealized love of fairy tales, but the one built through resistance, daily affection, and the courage to stay when everything tells you to leave. When he invited her to meet his mother, something inside her tightened. Not out of fear, but instinct. The intuition of a woman who has been humiliated too many times not to recognize when pain is about to come. Bernardo's mother was Luna's opposite in every way. Elegant, cold, precise, with a gaze that pierced and wounded without ever raising her voice. The meeting was set for a formal dinner, and from the moment Luna stepped into that marble and silence house, she knew she didn't belong there. The mother-in-law looked at her dress with disdain, corrected her pronunciation twice, and asked questions that, on the surface, seemed kind, but carried hidden thorns. "And your parents, dear, are they still alive? Where did you say you studied? How many siblings do you have? Or were you also an only child by abandonment?" Each phrase was a blade, and Bernardo didn't react. He stayed silent, staring at his plate, trying to appear neutral. That night ended with a quick kiss at the gate, a forced smile, and a lump in Luna's throat she wouldn't be able to untie for weeks. In the days that followed, the distance began subtly. Bernardo seemed more tense, more distracted, with short replies and a haste that hadn't been there before. Luna felt something had changed, but she couldn't name it. Until one day, a familiar face walked into the flower shop, and in a hushed voice and a gossipy tone said, "Word is you used to be an escort, that you're trying to trap the doctor's son with a pregnancy." The world collapsed. Luna didn't respond. She simply closed the shop early, cried on the bathroom floor for hours, and understood, that day, that the love she had lived might never have been accepted. Not truly. Not by the world he came from. But she still didn't know the worst. This was only the beginning of the pain they were about to cause. Luna's pain was not new. It wasn't the first time she had been judged by strangers, labeled based on rumors, or had her story erased by a venomous phrase. But this time, it hurt differently, because she truly believed that, with Bernardo, she would finally have the chance to be loved without having to explain herself. That for once, love would overcome origins, social class, and the absence of a last name. But it didn't. And not because he didn't love her. It was clear that he did. But because he didn't know how to stand by her in the face of his own fears. Fear of his mother. Fear of society. Fear of defying the foundations of the name he carried. And that fear, silent and disguised as neutrality, was the sharpest blade Luna had ever known. Each day she felt Bernardo becoming more a reflection of the environment that raised him, and less the man who once said he loved her with passion. What was once a meeting of souls had now become a clash of worlds. One afternoon, Luna received an envelope at her shop. No sender. Inside were copies of documents from the orphanage where she had lived for 2 years, along with an anonymous note. "The people of this city deserve to know who you really are." Her hands trembled, her stomach twisted. She had never told Bernardo that she had lived in shelters, that she had escaped from an abusive uncle, that she had survived however she could until she found some stability, not out of shame, but out of protection. That part of her life had not yet healed. And now, someone was digging it all up, to expose it like an open wound. The suspicion was inevitable. It had to have been his mother. No one else had the motive, the access, or the coldness to turn such a cruel past into ammunition. That woman didn't just want to push her away. She wanted to destroy her. When confronted, Bernardo hesitated. He didn't defend Luna with strength. He said maybe his mother was just protecting the family, that Luna was overreacting, that she should let the past stay in the past. That was the moment Luna realized. He wasn't part of the future she wanted to build, because you can't build a future with someone who denies your past. They argued, shouted, blamed each other, and in the middle of the pain, she said what had to be said. "If you don't have the courage to defend me, then you don't deserve to be by my side." And she left. For the first time, Luna chose herself. She walked away with tears in her eyes, but her dignity intact. That very night, his mother hosted a dinner to clean up her son's image. She invited friends, journalists, politicians. She said the relationship ended due to a difference in values. And when a reporter asked if the girl had lied about her past, she responded with icy precision. "Some people are masters of disguise, but the truth always comes out." The phrase echoed through the city like sweet poison. Within days, Luna lost 2 floral event contracts. Old customers vanished, and even her landlord said she preferred to avoid trouble. It was a social lynching executed with surgical precision, and Luna, once again, alone. But what the mother didn't know was that Luna had already faced hell, and that no pain could break her entirely anymore. With only a small bag of clothes and a heart in shards, she left with no destination, turned off her phone, deleted her social media, and disappeared. She left only a handwritten note taped to the flower shop door. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to survive. On the other side of the city, Bernardo was trying to find her. He called friends, knocked on doors, cried silently for having lost her. Not for lack of love, but out of cowardice. And his mother, pretending to comfort him, told him he had done the right thing. That woman would have only ruined his life. That children from broken homes never build stable ones. She smiled with her lips, but the poison still dripped from her eyes. What no one knew was that Luna wasn't just running away. She was carrying a new life. A child born of true love, even if sabotaged. A baby who, without knowing, would change the destiny of all those souls, including the woman who had tried to erase her with sharp words. Because love always finds a way, even if it's born in silence. Luna no longer existed in the city. To many, she had simply vanished like morning mist under the sun. But her absence was replaced by something even crueler. Lies. Lies dressed as truths, built with sneaky phrases, whispered in hair salons, spread in cafes, murmured in mom groups and social gatherings. "Did you hear? She used to sell herself for a few coins. They say even her name was fake. She left because she was pregnant by a man who wasn't even Bernardo." None of these phrases had any basis, but they had a source. And all of them, without exception, came from the cold hands of the mother-in-law. A woman as refined in appearance as she was brutal in strategy. She never screamed, never got her hands dirty, never lost control. She simply planted and let the poison grow like ivy on an old wall. The city, though small, had a thirst for scandal. And there's no tastier dish than the downfall of a woman who dared to dream beyond what was allowed. Luna became urban legend, a cautionary tale told to daughters from good families. Be careful who you get involved with. But she also became a ghost to Bernardo. Everywhere he went, someone had a comment, and each one pierced him like a blade soaked in regret. He had let the woman he loved walk away, had watched in silence as she was torn apart in public, and now he couldn't even sleep. He dreamed of her, searched for traces of her face on the streets. reread old messages with the pain of someone listening to a song that would never play again. Meanwhile, Luna fought to start over. In a rural town, far from everything and everyone, she found work at a greenhouse. It wasn't her own shop, but it was enough to keep her from starving. She spent her nights in a modest boarding house, sharing a room with a blind elderly woman and a fat cat. Every penny was accounted for, and her body began to change. The pregnancy advanced, bringing fatigue, nausea, insomnia, but also a light. For the first time, Luna had a concrete reason to keep going. Not for herself, for the baby, a child she never planned for, but who had become everything she had left. But the emotional pain was constant, the fear of being judged as a single mother, the weight of imagining the child growing up without a father, the memory of every cursed phrase she had heard, including from the mother-in-law herself. "You don't have the structure to be part of our family." She replayed that sentence in her mind like a whip, but she kept going, because the strength that moves a mother isn't logic, it's instinct. And instinct doesn't ask permission, it simply pushes forward. But even distance couldn't shield her from cruelty. One day, while buying groceries, she overheard two women at the checkout. "Did you see the article online? Looks like Dr. Bernardo's ex is being sued for identity theft. They say she pretended to be an orphan to get money." Luna froze. Her legs gave out. She had to grab onto a shelf. Someone, somewhere in the city she had fled, had created a fake website with manipulated documents, sensationalist headlines, and anonymous comments, all with one purpose: destruction. It was too much. That night, she cried so hard she woke up bleeding. She rushed to the hospital. The doctor said, "You need complete bed rest. You're at risk of losing the baby." The words struck like lightning. For the first time, the fear of dying without leaving anything behind paralyzed her. She held her belly and asked for forgiveness. To her child, to life, to herself. And she whispered a vow: "You will be born, and no one else will destroy us again." Meanwhile, the mother-in-law quietly celebrated. She believed she had won. To her, Luna was just a threat eliminated. But fate, wise and silent, was preparing a reckoning worthy of everything that had been done. Because the justice of time is patient and infallible, and it would come, not for revenge, but for love. A small, fragile love, wrapped inside a belly that grew in silence, but would soon cry out for the first time, and forever change the hearts that once thought themselves untouchable. The silence between Bernardo and Luna grew like an invisible wall, built from unspoken sorrows, unanswered questions, and promises left in pieces. Since the night of the dinner, something had broken between them, something subtle but irreversible. It wasn't love that disappeared, it was trust. It was the feeling of safe harbor that fades when the one who should protect hesitates. With every new attempt to reconnect, Luna felt Bernardo slipping further away. His messages were brief, the calls infrequent, and the worst part was realizing that he seemed more concerned with containing social damage than understanding the pain she carried in her chest. It was as if the love she gave, whole and fearless, had to compete with the reputation of his family, and lost. Luna tried to fight, tried to be rational, to give him space, to believe that time would heal. But time only revealed the abyss. One night, she decided to find him. She showed up at his house unannounced. The maid hesitated before letting her in. Luna waited in the living room. Minutes later, Bernardo appeared, in a suit, tired, glancing at his watch. The reunion was cold. He didn't hug her. He said he was busy, that he had an early meeting, that his mother didn't want any trouble at home. Luna held back the tears. But when he asked, "Did you really have to come without warning?" she understood everything. The problem was never that she came. It was his fear that someone might see her there. They argued, and it wasn't a loud fight. It was one of those that cut in silence, that wound with glances and words spoken through clenched teeth. Luna spoke about the pain of being the target of rumors, about the loneliness she felt, about his cowardice. Bernardo tried to defend himself, said he was trying to protect the relationship, that things were complicated, that his mother was ill, that he needed time. But for Luna, that was the end. She didn't need a man who asked for time to love her. She needed someone who would stand up now, who would beat his chest and say, "This is the woman of my life." And he didn't. That night, Luna decided to leave. She made no announcements, no scenes. She simply vanished. Left the shop key with a friend, sold what little she had, packed her few belongings, and disappeared. No trace, no letters, no goodbyes. Just her, the baby growing inside her, and a heart still beating, even if shattered. She thought Bernardo wouldn't look for her, but she was wrong. Bernardo lost his mind. When he realized Luna was gone, he searched everywhere, called friends, checked hospitals, even visited the old orphanage where she had lived. He learned that her grandmother had died months earlier, and that Luna had no one left. He felt like the worst kind of man. Not only had he lost the woman he loved, but he had allowed her to be destroyed without lifting a finger. He confronted his mother, demanded to know if she was behind the gossip, the websites, the leaked documents. His mother didn't deny it. She simply said, "I protected you. I did what any mother would do." Bernardo shouted, told her he didn't need protection. He needed respect. For the first time, the son stood his ground. And for the first time, the mother realized she was losing more than a son. She was losing his love, but it was already too late. Luna was gone, far away, alone, pregnant, and determined to move on by herself. Their love hadn't survived the pressure. It couldn't resist the weight of a society that demands emotional pedigree, that measures people by their past, that treats poor women as threats. Luna no longer wanted to fight for a place in a world that rejected her. She just wanted a quiet corner to raise her child. A child she didn't yet know would change everything, even the heart of the woman who hurt her most, because their love may not have triumphed as a couple, but it was still alive, beating as life itself within her. And it was only the beginning. The silence that follows a disappearance is not emptiness. It's muffled noise. It's the absence that screams. It's the echo of a name no one dares to say anymore. Luna wasn't dead, but to the city, to acquaintances, to social media, it was as if she had ceased to exist. A woman who vanished without a trace. No clues, no note, no goodbye. Just a closed shop, an empty house, and a hollow ache in the chest of those left behind. At first, Bernardo refused to accept it. He thought she would come back, that she just needed time. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and no news ever came. He went to the police, filed a report, showed photos, provided numbers. But he heard the words that hurt most. "She left of her own will, sir. There's no crime." Bernardo spent sleepless nights trying to guess where she could be. He reread old conversations, zoomed in on photos hoping for a detail that might be a clue, mentally replayed every word she ever said, searching for a where, a when, a maybe. But he only found what he already knew. He had lost her. Not by accident, but by omission. His mother pretended to comfort him. If she left, she wasn't worth that much. "Believe me, it was for the best. You need to move on." Bernardo listened with dead eyes. The woman who gave him life now seemed incapable of understanding what it means to lose a love that was also future, home, family, redemption. But the world kept spinning, indifferent to his grief. The business demanded his presence. The social calendar demanded appearances. Time, cruel as ever, tried to erase Luna's memory, but he refused to let her disappear inside him. Meanwhile, Luna lived the exact opposite of what she once imagined for her life. She rented a tiny back room behind a modest house, in a distant village where no one knew her. The rent was cheap. She shared a bathroom with 3 other women and cooked on a 2-burner stove. Every coin was counted. Her prenatal care was done at a faraway public clinic, with long lines and rushed appointments. Her feet were swollen, her face pale, her heart uneasy. But she stood firm, because now it wasn't just for her. It was for someone who breathed inside her. A new heart, innocent, beating with hope. Even far away, Luna still heard echoes of the past. A neighbor mentioned seeing her face on an old social media post. A delivery man said he'd heard her name on a local radio station. And in each of those moments, the fear returned. The fear of being found, judged, dragged back to a place where she had been discarded. So she stayed inside as much as possible. She embroidered, read borrowed books, and wrote letters to a child, yet unborn. Letters that began with, "My love," and ended with, "You are the reason I breathe." Deep in her chest, Luna still carried an unresolved pain. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. The worst kind, the kind that comes from someone you love. She remembered Bernardo's gaze, the way he held her, the unspoken promise that they would stay together against the world. But the world spoke louder, and he went silent. Now, she was alone, but in peace. Because for the first time, she was the author of her own story. Until one day, everything changed. It was a phone call, a distant friend, her voice trembling. "Luna, there's something you need to know. Your story isn't over." It was the sign of a turning point, the kind of truth that tears through silence. Because what no one imagined was that the child growing inside her would come into the world carrying the power to unite what was broken, heal what was wounded, and transform even the coldest of hearts. Even the heart of the woman who once tried to destroy her. Pregnancy, by itself, is already an abyss of emotions. But when you go through it without support, without hugs, without eyes that shine at the sight of a growing belly, what should be a celebration becomes a crossing. Luna woke up early every day with an exhausted body, swollen feet, and a quiet soul. She looked in the mirror and saw a face she no longer recognized. Thinner, paler, but also stronger. She had never felt so afraid and so brave at the same time. She was not only carrying a child, she was carrying a new version of herself, more mature, more resilient, more whole. But the loneliness, it hurt. It hurt in the coffee she drank alone, in the absence of hands on her belly, in the silence of the prenatal appointments where no one asked, "Are you both doing okay?" The days passed slowly. Work became harder with each step. Back pain, sleepless nights, constant nausea. And even so, Luna pressed on. She wrote down appointment dates in an old planner, made baby name lists on loose sheets of paper. And every night, under a weak flashlight, she read borrowed books about motherhood from the church library. She learned how to fold cloth diapers, prepare herbal baths, massage away colic, all alone. Each small discovery was a personal victory, and each victory came with discreet tears. Because even being strong, Luna was still human, and she missed warmth. She missed Bernardo, even if she didn't want to admit it. In her heart, there was still room for him, but not for the man who stayed silent, not for the man who didn't protect her. It was hard to separate the two versions. The Bernardo who once said she was the love of his life, and the Bernardo who looked down when she was humiliated. That's what hurt the most, because she had loved him with everything she had, and he hadn't held on. Now, between them, there was a new bond. A little being moving inside her with gentle kicks, as if whispering, "Mommy, I'm here." And it was for him that Luna kept going. For him, she endured every clinic line, every bland meal at the boarding house, every absence on ultrasound days. She began writing a journal for her child. She called it Letters for the Future. In it, she poured her feelings, her dreams for him, her hopes for life. She wrote with brutal honesty. She said, "If I seem weak someday, forgive me. I'm learning to be born again too." She stored the pages in a shoebox lined with blue fabric. It was her treasure, her emotional legacy for a child who would face a world stacked against him, but a mother who would love him like no one else could. And it was in this quiet battle that something unexpected happened. During one appointment, the doctor noticed something unusual. She requested urgent tests. The results showed possible complications. The baby presented signs of cardiac irregularities. It wasn't clear how serious, but constant monitoring would be essential. Luna was stunned. She had no health insurance, no money, no one. The clinic doctor was direct. "You need a specialist, someone experienced in neonatal heart conditions." Luna left the clinic with trembling legs, sat on the curb, cried like she hadn't cried in weeks. And in that storm of tears, she thought of something she had sworn never to do: ask for help from the one who hurt her the most. Because if there was anyone capable of handling rare conditions, it was her, the mother-in-law, the woman who had publicly destroyed her, but also the only retired doctor in the region with expertise in pediatric cardiology. It was as if fate were forcing a reunion. Cruel, unexpected, ironically necessary. Luna hesitated, took a deep breath, and wrote a message. Short, cold, direct. "Doctor, I know you hate me, but I'm pregnant, and my baby might die. I need help." She didn't expect a reply, but she got one. "Send the address. I'm coming." It was the first time Luna truly trembled, because she knew she was about to face the past, the fear, the woman who tried to destroy her. But now, with a new life in her arms, and what would come next would change everything. The mother-in-law's arrival came without hugs or sweet words. It was like the onset of a storm on a stifling day, inevitable, heavy with tension, and wrapped in a silence louder than any accusation. When the door to the boarding house opened and Luna saw her standing there, hair tied back, an old lab coat in her hand, eyes narrowed, she didn't know what to do. She wanted to scream, to cry, to say it still hurt, deeply. But she said nothing, because between the two of them, there now existed a greater bond, a child, a life that needed to survive. And in that moment, every ounce of resentment had to be swallowed. The retired doctor stepped forward, sat at the edge of the bed, and asked to listen to the baby's heart. Her touch was firm, precise, and for a moment, Luna remembered that this woman wasn't just a cruel mother-in-law. She was also a brilliant physician, and perhaps now her baby's only hope. The exams she brought in her bag were advanced. Portable devices, digital stethoscopes, fetal pressure monitors. She performed everything in silence. When finished, she looked at Luna with a cold seriousness and said, "The baby is showing signs of a rare congenital heart defect. If not monitored urgently, he's at risk during birth." Luna froze, tried to understand, but the words spun in circles. The mother-in-law continued, with the clinical detachment of someone who had operated on hundreds of tiny hearts. "We need to get you to a hospital with a neonatal ICU, and you can't go into labor now. You need complete rest." In the days that followed, the mother-in-law moved into the same room. She slept on an improvised chair, measured the baby's heartbeat every 6 hours, brewed herbal teas for the daughter-in-law she never accepted. She didn't speak of feelings, but she showed care. She washed Luna's clothes, heated water for baths, tended to her wounds without ever mentioning the ones she had caused. Luna, in turn, watched in silence. She didn't understand, she didn't trust, but she couldn't deny it. That woman was saving her child, and perhaps saving pieces of her too. One night, the pain struck like thunder, a dry, violent contraction, then another, and another. The floor of the room became soaked. Luna screamed. The mother-in-law leapt from her chair and within seconds was on the phone calling an ambulance. Time felt distorted. The world spun. Luna felt her soul leave her body. The pain was unbearable. She called out her baby's name, as if willing him back to her. And on the other side, the mother-in-law shouted orders, applied pressure to key points, maintained the surgical calm of someone who had seen death up close, and refused to let it win again. At the hospital, chaos erupted. Doctors panicked at the severity of the situation. The baby was in fetal distress. His little heart was weak. Oxygen levels were dropping fast. The mother-in-law entered the delivery room wearing her old coat, pleading, "Let me help. I know this malformation. I've studied this case. Let me try." There was hesitation, but the authority in her eyes prevailed. And there, in the operating room, she took command. The cold, rejecting doctor was now fighting for a life that didn't yet have a name, but already had a place in her heart. The birth was dramatic. Blood, screams, masks, bright lights. For minutes that felt like hours, silence reigned after delivery. The baby didn't cry, didn't move. Luna, sobbing, couldn't scream. She was too weak. But across the room, the mother-in-law was kneeling, performing cardiac maneuvers on a body the size of her hands, breathing deeply, whispering, fighting. And then, the cry came. Weak, but real. A sharp, torn, perfect sound. The sound of life. The baby was immediately intubated, rushed to the ICU. Diagnosis: severe heart defect, but reversible with intensive care and daily monitoring. The retired doctor was applauded by everyone. She saved her grandson. She saved the woman she once tried to destroy. And as she left the room, with tears in her eyes, she approached Luna and said, voice trembling, "He's going to live, and I won't run from my guilt anymore." It was the first time Luna saw tears in those eyes. Not from exhaustion, not from professional duty, but from love. Late, yes, but real. And in that hospital room, something more than a child was born. A new bond, a possibility of forgiveness, a chance for rebuilding. There is no greater pain for a strong woman than having to depend, in her most vulnerable moment, on the very person who once tried to destroy her. And that was the paradox Luna now lived. The same woman who once humiliated her in front of a crowded room, who spread lies across the city, who sabotaged her reputation and forced her to disappear, now held her grandson in her arms with the strength of someone who loves, the desperation of someone afraid to lose him, and a presence Luna never imagined witnessing. It was a daily emotional collision. Instinct told her to run. The past screamed not to trust. But the present revealed an undeniable truth. Without that woman, her child would have died. The days in the hospital were long, exhausting, filled with beeping machines, nurses rushing, medical reports, and muffled tears. Luna couldn't stay in the NICU with her baby all the time, but the mother-in-law, with her medical credentials, even retired, had access, and she used every second of it, observing, intervening, studying. She brought reports home, called old colleagues, arranged meetings with specialists, and quietly used her influence to secure the best possible care. She asked for no recognition, gave no explanations. She simply cared. Luna, meanwhile, was torn. She wanted to say thank you, but couldn't. She wanted to forget the past, but it resurfaced every time she looked at that woman. It was impossible to erase what had been said, what had been done, what had been endured. But it was also impossible to ignore what was happening now. One day, overwhelmed with stress, her milk dried up, and the mother-in-law showed up with a solution: a network of anonymous donors, a specific formula recommended by a personal contact, and a natural supplement to help her sleep, all delivered without fanfare, without apologies, but with a look different, a look that didn't judge, that didn't wound, that didn't diminish. And it was that look that began to break down Luna's walls. She started noticing the details, the way the mother-in-law folded the baby's cloths, how she adjusted the pillow to prevent reflux, how she gently stroked the baby's forehead with wrinkled fingers. They were such small gestures, but so sincere. One morning, Luna awoke on the hospital reception sofa to find a blanket over her and a note beside her. "You're exhausted. I'll watch him today. Please rest." It was the first time Luna cried without pain. She cried for a gesture of humanity. She cried because she felt that maybe, just maybe, the woman who once hated her was beginning to love her, or at least, to respect her. And for Luna, that was already immense. One Sunday afternoon, during a visit to the NICU, Luna walked in and saw her mother-in-law holding the baby. She was singing an old lullaby, almost in a whisper, eyes closed. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Luna stood there, watching. Time felt suspended, and when the mother-in-law noticed her, she wasn't startled. She simply smiled, a shy, imperfect but genuine smile, and said, "He likes my voice. That surprises me. No one ever liked my voice before." It was a confession, a disguised apology, an opening, and Luna understood. She sat beside her, for the first time, side by side. Neither spoke of the past, neither asked for forgiveness, neither explained anything. But the baby, sleeping between them, did that job. He was the one connecting everything, the one speaking without words. You don't have to love each other, but you can care for each other. And in that silence, full of humanity, something new was born. It wasn't forgiveness yet, nor reconciliation. It was a seed, a possibility, a beginning. Luna still carried wounds. The mother-in-law still bore guilt. But now, they were willing to build something. Because between hatred and love, there is care. And sometimes, in caring, we learn how to truly love. Medicine had always been the mother-in-law's shield. Behind lab coats, cold diagnoses, technical terms, and surgical precision, she hid from the world, and most of all, from herself. It was easier to be respected as a professional than seen as a woman, as a mother, as a human being. For years, she built a wall of competence to keep emotions out, believing that saving lives could somehow excuse the ones she never knew how to love. But there, in that neonatal ICU, drowned in the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, something inside her began to crack, because the patient was no longer anonymous. He was her grandson, and the baby's mother was no longer a stranger. She was the young woman she once tried to crush, and who now trusted her, not by choice, but out of necessity. And that kind of trust changes everything, because nothing weighs heavier than the trust of someone you hurt. The hospital routine became their new normal. The mother-in-law woke before the nurses, reviewed charts, read medical journals, watched videos about experimental therapies, scheduled consultations with specialists. She was tireless, and not to prove anything, but to try to repair the irreparable. Luna watched it all from a distance. At first, suspicious, then moved. She began to see that behind that woman's coldness was a love, timid, strange, but real. A love that didn't know how to say sorry, but prepared the baby's formula with precision. That didn't know how to hug, but adjusted the mother's pillow after she fell asleep from exhaustion. That didn't know how to talk, but held her hand during exam results. And it was in that process that slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. One brick at a time. No rush, no spectacle, Luna started helping with the medical notes, picked up the charts, read the reports, asked questions. And the mother-in-law, surprised, answered. Sometimes curtly, sometimes patiently, but she answered. When Luna said she wanted to better understand her son's condition, the mother-in-law offered to teach. They sat side by side, night after night, studying the baby's heart as if it were the center of the universe. And to them, it truly was. During those nights of study and vigilance, they began to exchange stories. Luna told of her childhood in shelters, how she used to sleep clutching a doll made of socks, how she was expelled from school because her mother vanished and didn't sign her enrollment. The mother-in-law listened in silence. Sometimes she looked away. Sometimes she left the room for a few minutes and came back with red eyes. She didn't say anything, but Luna felt it. And then, it was her turn to listen. The mother-in-law spoke of a husband she loved, but who betrayed her. Of a son she raised with an iron hand because she didn't know how to be gentle. Of the nights she cried behind doors, unable to connect with Bernardo. She said a phrase Luna would never forget. I was never kind, because no one ever taught me that I was allowed to be. There, for the first time, they saw each other as women, not as enemies, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two survivors, two wounded souls who for the first time were healing through each other. And in that fragile and rebirthing environment, the mother-in-law started to be called something else. One day, while trying to say doctor, Luna slipped and said without thinking, Mom. They both froze. Time stopped for a second. Luna tried to correct herself, swallowed the word. But the mother-in-law just smiled. A small, hesitant smile, but one that said everything. She didn't reply. Yes, my daughter. But she answered with a gesture. She touched Luna's face and said softly, You're exhausted. Go rest. I'll stay with him tonight. And in that gesture, forgiveness began to take shape. Still unnamed, still uncertain, but real. Medicine, once a symbol of power that separated them, now became a bridge of reconciliation. And along that path of syringes, charts, and improvised night shifts, something bigger than healing was born. Love. A different kind of love. A love built not on idealization, but on respect, on care, on recognizing the other's pain. Because sometimes, the most powerful medicine is being seen, being heard, being held by someone you never imagined you'd one day call home. The days that followed were stitched together by a rare kind of silence. Not the silence of rejection, nor the silence of anger, but the silence of care. A silence full of meaning, of small offerings, of glances that had finally learned not to judge. Luna and her mother-in-law no longer needed to say much. Everything was there, in the gestures, in the way they took turns in the NICU, like passing the baton of a shared love, a common mission. One waited for the other to have coffee. One warmed the other's soup without having to ask. And when one got emotional at the incubator, the other held her hand, without words, without explanations. Because now, they both understood. They were caring for the same life, the same love. The baby still required delicate attention. There were good days, and others where the fever spiked without warning, where the heartbeat shifted suddenly, where doctors spoke too quietly in the halls. On those days, Luna trembled inside. But those were also the days she needed her mother-in-law the most. Because despite everything, that woman knew what to do. She could interpret a scan. She could predict a complication. She knew where to touch to soothe. And that wasn't just science. It was instinct. It was love expressing itself in the only form she knew, competence. And it was then that Luna understood one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes love arrives distorted. It comes rough. It comes in harsh gestures, in curt words, in eyes that don't know how to show affection. But it's love all the same. A love that wasn't raised to be sweet, but when given space, transforms. The mother-in-law didn't become a soft woman, but she became a present one. And Luna, who had always longed to be accepted, now found herself being cared for by the very woman who once swore she would never be enough. It was, at the very least, poetic. They began to share almost everything. The baby's medications, the medical reports, the sunny days in the hospital courtyard, even sleepless nights. Luna started to trust. And for her, trust was a revolutionary act. She began leaving the baby alone with her mother-in-law without fear. She started smiling when she saw those wrinkled hands tickling the baby's tiny feet. For the first time, she called her ma'am with tenderness, not resentment. And the mother-in-law, in turn, began to treat Luna as something she'd never admitted out loud. But now let's slip through her gestures. As a daughter, one afternoon, during a bandage change, the mother-in-law said, "You're doing everything right. I've never seen a mother so attentive. I wish I had been like that with my son." Luna froze. It was the first time she heard her speak of Bernardo, without superiority, without judgment, just as a mother, full of regret, and that moved her. She answered with the only thing she could, a look of understanding, of silent forgiveness, of someone who didn't want to reopen wounds, just move forward, because now there was a baby between them, a bond of blood and love, and no old pain was stronger than the will to help him live. As the days passed, the doctors began to marvel. The baby responded better to treatments. He gained weight. He opened his eyes for the first time, smiled for the first time, and on the day they removed his breathing tube, Luna fell to her knees on the hospital floor and wept like never before. Her mother-in-law rushed to her. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt too, and cried with her. For the first time, they wept for the same reason, for the same victory, for the same love. In that moment, Luna knew what once was war was now home. What once was pain was now care. And what once was hatred had become love. A love stitched together by scars. A love that had learned how to heal. It happened on a silent night, one of those when the world seems to sleep deeper and pain wakes earlier, that everything changed. The hospital was quiet, the hallways empty. The soft glow of the waiting room lamp flickered like it danced with ghosts of the past. The baby slept after a mild fever crisis, breathing with difficulty but with his chest rising and falling under Luna's watchful gaze. She had been sitting in that armchair for hours, barefoot, body bent forward, eyes hollow from weeks without rest. And then, without strength, without reserves, she began to cry. A silent cry, exhausted. A cry of a mother pushing beyond human limits, carrying the weight of guilt, fear of the future, and longing for what never was. It wasn't a cry asking for comfort, only presence. Her mother-in-law, resting on an improvised sofa on the other side of the room, stood up without a sound. She walked slowly toward the armchair. Luna tried to wipe the tears, turn her face, hide the fragility she'd always masked with pride, but she couldn't, and for the first time, she didn't have to. Her mother-in-law knelt beside her, struggling, placing her hands on her knees, and said the one sentence Luna never imagined hearing. "Not in this life, not from that woman. You're not alone, my daughter." The world stopped. The air seemed to vanish for a moment. Luna blinked slowly, as if to confirm she heard right. My daughter. Two simple words, yet they carried an ocean of meaning. That woman, who once spat venom, now offered shelter. That woman, who once spread lies, now delivered a truth. She saw Luna as part of her. Not out of convenience, not out of duty, but out of recognition, out of shared pain, out of a mutual love for the same child. Luna didn't reply with words. She simply collapsed, rested her head on her mother-in-law's lap, and cried, with everything she had, with every story stuck in her throat for months, with all the loneliness buried in her chest for years. And the mother-in-law embraced her, tightly, firmly, as if also apologizing with her body. With trembling fingers, she stroked Luna's hair as if to say, "I failed you, but I'm here now, and I will never let you be alone again." That hug lasted long enough to heal old wounds, to transform memories of humiliation into moments of redemption, to rebuild ties they didn't know could exist. Because in that moment, there were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. There were two mothers. Two women who loved each other too late, but at the exact right time. In the days that followed, everything changed. The way they walked through hospital hallways, now side by side. The way they spoke, now with intimacy, shy smiles, inside jokes. Even the doctors noticed. There was something beautiful between them, something rare, something no one could explain, but everyone felt. Luna was no longer afraid, her mother-in-law no longer angry. Now, they had each other, and that was enough. The baby, once the fragile link between two warring worlds, was now the living symbol of peace born between them. He was growing, improving, responding to treatment as if he could sense that the world around him had changed. As if he knew that now, finally, he was loved by a whole family, even if made from the broken pieces life had left behind. And that's how, on a quiet night, one improbable word became truth. Daughter. And in that same moment, the heart that was once rejected finally found a home. True healing doesn't stay hidden in the backstage of pain. It demands light, a name, the courage to be seen. And that's exactly what the mother-in-law understood when the ICU doctor pulled her aside and said the baby would be discharged in the coming days. The treatment had worked. Vital signs were stable, and soon he could go home. But what home? What future? What truth would support that new beginning? Because Luna was still, to the world, a missing woman, and to society, a figure stained by lies. And the mother-in-law knew, caring in silence was no longer enough. It was time to speak aloud. For the first time in her life, she wanted to be heard not as a doctor, nor as a powerful woman, but as a human being. And more than that, as someone who publicly admitted she was wrong. So when she arrived home with Luna and the baby, after discharge, she made an announcement. She would make a statement. She gathered relatives, neighbors, former colleagues in medicine, local journalists, and people who had once spread the very lies she herself had fueled. She set up a small platform in the front yard. Luna was in shock. She tried to back away, feared it was a trap, but the mother-in-law looked her in the eyes and said firmly, "It's time for the world to know who you are, and what I did to you." That late afternoon, under the pale sun of a cloudy sky, the mother-in-law climbed onto the improvised stage. Luna, nervous, stood behind her with the baby in her arms. The murmur grew. Cell phones began recording, and then silence fell. The mother-in-law took a deep breath. Her eyes scanned the dozens of faces staring at her in anticipation, and then she began to speak. She said that months ago, she had committed one of the biggest mistakes of her life, judging a woman by her background and not by her character. She confessed she used her influence to destroy, that she spread rumors, manipulated information, that she created obstacles, sowed distrust, and caused suffering, and that, out of pride, she nearly condemned her own grandson to death, who now lived thanks to the courage of the mother she had tried to crush. The crowd was stunned. No one breathed. And then she did something even greater. She turned to Luna and said, before everyone, with teary eyes, "I lied about you, and I caused you pain. But today, you are my daughter. And if there's anything I can do to help the world see you for who you truly are, I'll start now." The audience applauded, not out of politeness, but out of respect, out of admiration. Luna couldn't hold back the tears. She hugged the baby tightly, and when the mother-in-law stepped down from the platform, she was received with an embrace that no longer needed explanations. It was done. It was said. It was repaired. In the following days, Luna was invited for interviews. She shared her story. She inspired other women. The town began to see her differently. The eyes that once judged now admired. The hands that once pushed her away now reached out. She returned to working with flowers, but now in her own store, rebuilt with help from her mother-in-law, who donated the land and financed everything. On the signboard, in small, delicate letters, there was a hand-embroidered phrase, "Flowers grow even from the soil that burned them." And when asked the baby's name, Luna would smile and say, "Bernardo," in honor of his father, who once loved me but lacked the courage, and his grandfather, whom he never met, but will always be remembered. The mother-in-law, now a full-time grandmother, cared for the child with a tenderness no one ever imagined she had in her. And she cared for Luna too, not out of duty, but as redemption, as affection, as choice. Redemption had happened, and it was public, because some apologies need to be made with the world watching. So there's no doubt that love, when it is true, is stronger than any pride. Starting over doesn't mean going back to the beginning. It means building a new path from the rubble, with hands still wounded but a heart renewed. For Luna, the new beginning didn't come wrapped in celebration or euphoria. It came gradually, with the baby's cries in the middle of the night, with the scent of warm milk filling the kitchen, with the soft rustle of pages as she read children's stories sitting on the floor of their new home. The simple life she had always dreamed of was finally becoming real. It wasn't a mansion. It had no luxury, but it had peace. And that was more than she could ever ask for, after everything she had lived. The house was renovated with help from her mother-in-law. It was small but full of details that spoke of care. The walls painted light blue, the wooden furniture restored, the little crochet doilies her mother-in-law crafted in quiet afternoons of repentance. Luna handpicked each flower in the garden. She said she wanted a space where her son could play barefoot, run among the plants, grow up without fear. And when she planted the first seedling, It was her mother-in-law who held the pot. They looked at each other. No words were needed. They knew. They were burying the past to let the present bloom. The baby grew up healthy. Little Bernardo was strong, curious, full of smiles and quirky habits. He had his mother's eyes and his father's gestures. With every medical milestone, every improvement in his heart condition, the grandmother rejoiced. She insisted on going to every appointment, took notes, asked questions, and at the end, always said, "You'll go far, my little one, you'll go far." Her grandson, without knowing it, was her living redemption, the bond that healed her from the inside out. Luna had changed too. The pain that once was a raw scar had now become strength. She created a small online channel where she spoke about motherhood, resilience, and second chances. Her video telling the baby's story went viral. Thousands of women connected with it. Some cried, others gave thanks. Many said she was the inspiration they needed to start over. And she, through tears, responded with humility. "I just survived, and I chose to live." The mother-in-law came to be known as Grandma Nina by the neighbors. The woman who had once been feared became a beloved figure in the community. She offered volunteer consultations, gave talks about child health, and helped other mothers understand difficult diagnoses. She never again used the title doctor. Now she introduced herself as Bernardo's grandmother and Luna's mother. And whenever someone said she had changed, she would respond with something simple. "It's just that I was loved when I least deserved it." The baby's father, Bernardo, reappeared. He came with lowered eyes, trembling hands, and an apology on his lips. He wanted to meet his son. He wanted to understand what he had missed. Luna received him with dignity. She said she forgave him, but there was no longer room for him in her life. "What we had was beautiful, but it's in the past. Today, our son has a family, and that is enough." He understood. He cried, kissed his son, and left. Luna no longer needed a prince. She had herself. She had a son. She had a mother-in-law who had become a mother. She had a house, a garden, and a story that inspired others. Above all, she had peace. And that was the true new beginning. Some bonds can't be explained by biology. They're not written on paper or recorded in civil registries. They live in shared silences, in hands extended in the dark, in hugs that heal invisible wounds. That was exactly the kind of bond that united Luna and her mother-in-law. Time passed. The baby grew. The house gained new colors. And the garden blossomed, always with new seedlings, as if the soil had learned from those two women that no matter how much something has been trampled, it can always bloom again. On little Bernardo's first birthday, Luna organized a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just carrot cake with chocolate icing, recyclable balloons, handmade banners, and flowers picked from her own yard. Friends, neighbors, and women who had followed her story online came from afar to celebrate. It was more than a party. It was a milestone, a symbol of all that had been overcome, a celebration of life, of motherhood, of transformation, but also, subtly, of the reconciliation between two generations of women who had to hurt each other to learn how to love. During the party, someone asked for a family photo. Luna smiled, called her mother-in-law, and held her son in her arms. In the photo, captured with simplicity and truth, were three generations united by something far stronger than blood: the choice to love, despite everything. The mother-in-law moved, held Luna's hand tightly. Her palm was rough, marked by time, by medicine, by mistakes. But that touch now carried only one message: I'm here. I always will be. Later, as the guests were leaving, Luna sat down with her son in her lap and her mother-in-law beside her. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the backyard. The boy laughed as he held his grandmother's fingers while she told stories of when she was a doctor, but in a playful tone, turning scalpels into magic wands, hospitals into enchanted castles. Luna watched in silence, her eyes teary, her heart warm. She no longer felt anger. She no longer felt pain, only gratitude. That afternoon, she wrote in her diary, the same one she started during lonely nights of pregnancy. It wasn't blood that gave me a mother. It was pain. It was time. It was care. And above all, it was love. Because yes, the woman who once judged her became the one who fought the hardest for her. The one who cried her tears. The one who celebrated her victories. And the baby, once fragile and at risk, had become the bridge connecting two hearts that would never have met otherwise. He was the miracle that turned resentment into tenderness, arrogance into humility, distrust into warmth. And so, with her eyes on the sunset and her son asleep between them, Luna understood. True love doesn't ask for permission, doesn't follow rules, doesn't choose the easy path. The love that transforms is born from the impossible, and it remains forever.